chef, farmer, owner of the Gather and Feast Farm and Crave Catering, and I love tomatoes. That's how this all came to be. Was like, I'm a tomato-holic, and that's how I came to start growing things in large quantities. And luckily, I have really good people that know a lot more than I do about a lot of those things to help bring things to fruition. Because when it was just me, some things grew, a lot of things didn't. And I remember one year with tomatoes, when at our other farm in Battleground, I had easily over 2,000 pounds of tomatoes, green tomatoes on the vines, and then the rains hit, and I got literally like 2 ripe tomatoes that year, and then everything was just wiped out. And I was like, you know, I felt like it was like an abusive relationship. I'm like, never again. But then I met somebody that knew a lot about tomatoes, and he's like, you need some hoop houses, because that'll keep the rain off. I'm like, okay, let's try that. So, so today, doing this some tomato smoking. Watch my temperature here. As soon as I open the door, it's gonna drop and stuff. But I prefer to smoke tomatoes that are about this size. It's just, for me, it's like just a perfect little. You cut them in half, you throw them on a pan, and they work out perfectly. This was some that I smoked yesterday while multitasking too many things. They got a little bit darker than I had intended, but the plan is to dry them a little bit to the point of, like, they're still juicy, but they've got a nice kind of like layer coating on the outside, so it's not like this, how it's pure wet and liquid. So I'm gonna throw some tomatoes on here. This all started with one year I was just oven drying tomatoes, and I was doing it at 180 degrees, and that seemed to be the perfect temperature for my home oven. And if I had, you know, 4 pans of them in there, because of all the moisture that was created, it would take a long time. And I had to play with the temperature, because the first time I did it, the temperature was too low, and I just put them in the oven overnight, and the next morning I checked them thinking, okay, this is gonna be great. And temperature was a perfect environment for mold to just like cover everything. And I was like, oh man, yeah, that was my reaction. I was like, my tomatoes. So then I raised the temperature up and found that 180 degrees was a sweet spot. And it was taking me, you know, probably about 10 hours to smoke them when there was that many tomatoes and that much moisture. If I only had 1 pan in, it would have taken a lot less time. So, and then the way that I got to smoking them is that with my catering company, we would store our equipment on the farm at the end of the summer. And so the smoker came back after the weekend summer events and stuff, and I'm like, you know, I'm gonna try throwing some of these in the smoker and then drying them. And that worked out like phenomenally well. Like, I wish I had smoked all of the tomatoes that I had. So so that's where I'm like, okay, as far as any other seasoning or anything else, I don't put any salt on it, because the flavor is just going to be more condensed, and I want to hey Zach, see what Deanna wants. Let her know I'm in the middle of something. As far as like what I'm going to use these for, come like middle of winter or whatever, I'll put them on salads, I'll put them in pasta. At Crave Catering, we make this really cool, just bite-sized homemade buttermilk biscuit. And then we put one of these smoked tomatoes on there, and then we melt some Tillamook cheddar, and it's like the most ridiculous appetizer. It's just really tasty. So, so I don't want to like influence the flavor so much that it's like only going to be used for one thing. My mom loves to take them and put them in the meatloaf that she makes, and as long as she keeps making meatloaf, I'll keep giving her smoked tomatoes. So once they start to get a little bit bigger in size, I'll then kind of, you know, it depends on what else is going on. I try and keep one pan keeping relatively the same size, because if you have like little tiny ones and big ones, like if I were to put halves of these, they're going to be done first. The way I'm doing it nowadays, it goes into the smoker, it gets a really heavy smoke on there, and then I bring it and put it in the oven and then finish it there on a really controlled temperature, because this thing, while it works great for also drying it, there's a lot more heat going on, so I tend to burn them more often in this. Like yesterday, I was doing 3 pans, but I was doing too many things, and about 2 of the pans burnt, and so I kind of salvaged what we had left here, and hopefully we'll have to taste it to see if there's a little bit too much of that black flavor in there going on.
Did you just top it with olive oil?
Yeah. So the olive oil is essential if you want to store it. If you're going to use them right away, then you know it's not as like crucial. But if you're going to store it at all and keep it, the key to do it is as your tomatoes are finished, and tomatoes like this part just breaks down completely, and so it's like almost non-existent once you get it to that point. So what I'll do is I'll heat the jar up, and usually if the oven's 180 degrees, I'll just throw jars in there, get them nice and warm, pull them out, and then as the tomatoes are ready, I'll pour some olive oil in the base here, and you know, about like a third of the jar, coat it really well, and then just start dropping tomatoes in there. And I'll take a spoon or a ladle, and I'll just gently push the tomato down in the oil, and keep doing that, and it forces the oil level up. And then when I need to put a little more, I add a little more. But usually, this one's kind of heavy-handed, but usually I'm about a third of a jar of olive oil, and it'll work its way all the way up to the top. Now, this one's poking out because I didn't pack the whole thing full. But what's really crucial is filling the jar, capping it off with olive oil, because if it's not capped and you have any like residual tomato around the jar or on the lid, you'll get mold. So usually I just take a paper towel or something, wipe out the inside really good, and then wipe off the lid. Make sure that the tomatoes are submerged underneath the oil. Put the cap on there. This wasn't even as warm as I normally put the top on, but did you hear it pop when I took the lid off? So I just refrigerate it from there, and then wait till it's time to use it. And then when I use it, I'll just however much I use at a time, and I usually just let it sit out to room temperature so that oil becomes liquid again, covers the top. If I need to top it off a little bit more, I'll do that, and then I'll also wipe off the rim and everything. It ends up doing pretty good for me. So when we have tomatoes that are like this here, the soft tomatoes work just fine. Doesn't have to be like. That's the cool thing about this is like it doesn't have to be the most beautiful tomato for it to come out decent in the smoker. It's just a matter of like making sure you have the best parts, of course, and they'll just do the same thing. So, but you can see how.
How long do you think they'll last in the fridge?
So I've got tomatoes in the fridge still from last year. Not many. It's like as I get towards the end, I like start using less and less and rationing them until tomato season. But they lasted about a year so far.
Are you heating up the oil along with the jar to?
Just the oil in the hot jar or the warm jar, and just room temperature oil. So it does warm it a little bit. If it's been, sometimes I'll only get half a jar, and then I'm like, okay, I've done so many and I've got this much left over, so I put it in the fridge, cap it with the oil, and then the next day or whatever, I'll add to it, and then I'll let that either sit in the oven or make a double boiler, and then turn the heat off, and then just sit it in there to warm that oil back up when I'm adding more tomatoes to it. But typically I don't like double boil it from the beginning. It's just if I'm adding to it later and it's been cold. So and as far as like the smoke goes, like this system worked really well. The first time I did it was like a barrel smoker, but this was perfect because the pans are the same size as what I have in what fits in the oven, and usually I pack them like probably like about this tight here. They're not, usually there's not a whole lot of room. The tighter you pack them, the more liquid there's going to be coming off of them, and it'll also depend on what kind of tomatoes you're smoking, and how quickly it will cook down and reduce. So in this particular setup here, it's got a water pan in there, and I found that if I don't have water in the water pan, it just the environment's so dry that everything burns. But I wouldn't spread the tomatoes out the way they are there. I would just kind of keep them close together, because otherwise you're going to have hot spots all over the place. So.
What kind of chips are you using?
So I have apple trees out there in the front, and so I'm just using trimmings from the apple trees.
Can you use pear tree also?
So I don't see why not. I think applewood is probably one of the most like common ones to smoke with. I haven't personally smoked with pear, but and I take that back, because we have some pear trees. We didn't separate the trimmings, so there very well could be some pear in the wood that we're using. But we have like the most abundance of the apple trees, so we're just using that. But I would try it out. I mean, whatever you have that's and I'm trying to remember, there's like kind of a rule, like you don't want to use pine, and I'm trying to think of what that rule is to not smoke with, so if you have something on your property, you can dry it out. We don't use it fresh. We cure it. We let it dry for a couple months, and like this is just from trimmings from February, March or so. Plus we've had a lot of dry environment. So.
Any fruit trees would be hard.
Yeah, I think most fruit trees would work for you.
Firs and pines have so much pitch.
My culinary team back at Crave, they're doing something interesting right now. They're saving tomatillo husks, and they're trying a little experiment with using those for smoking. So I'm interested to see how that turns out. Any questions? No? Not even? Not even? Can we try one?
Yes.
Yeah, of course we want.
No, if you don't. So, let's see here. How can I?
You need a toothpick thing in the thing?
Oh, yeah, that would be perfect. Thank you. You're hired. And then also too, when you're done, the oil is just phenomenal. It's great for marinating, or if you just want to toss some pasta in it. Now here I did just a variety of tomatoes, and this is what I pulled and kind of salvaged off of 2 pans. Some of it is a little bit softer, but you'll kind of get the gist. When I'm packing the tomatoes, the way that I know that I dried it enough is, if you guys want to step over here really quick, I'll show you. See how this one is kind of like gushing out? When you pack them in, see how this one's like, it's not, even though it looks juicy still? That's like about how that, you'll know you're like, okay, we're good to go, because you'll pack it down as you're going, and if you see just like tomato gushing everywhere, and be like, okay, that needed a little bit longer. So, but you know, it's every mistake makes for a good new recipe. So it just adds more to that smoked tomato oil. So, yeah. Yes, and you know, we're not certified organic here, but we are using the same practices. We don't use any chemicals, any pesticides, any chemical fertilizers. And so last year I was using this olive oil that I got from Costco, and it was a really high quality organic. I think it was from Spain, and I was super impressed with it. Great flavor. It worked perfect for this. And then I went to get it again, and they're carrying the same brand, but it's like garlic olive oil or something, and I'm like, why did you change? Yeah, so we get this one from one of our local purveyors. It's Classic Foods in Portland. They're just like kind of a small mom and pop shop that they make their own pasta, and they import stuff from Italy. Yes, please jump in, you guys.
Well, there's nothing quite like sitting in the stands at Chavez Ravine and watching the balls. Every pop-up looks like it's going out of the park. Right. I've never been in a ballpark that looks like that.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't fuck it up.
Do you need more than that?
Oh, ask Evan. Or is that for me for smoking? Is that for smoking?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay. Yeah, let's throw those on a pan.
Yeah, you do.
Just throw them right on there.
Got it?
If you get one that's a little bitter, it's because it was a little too done. And by the time I was pulling them off, it was dark and I didn't have any light. So
When
I'm like,
you leave them in the smoker, I didn't do that.
I like to put a heavy smoke on them and then move them to the oven because it's a better temperature regulator. But it'd take, probably in here, it'd take probably about 5 hours or so.
What kind of temperature?
And you want to keep it under 200. 180 is like the sweet spot. But with
I heard
this,
you say 180 in your other oven.
yeah, with this, because the heat's coming from the bottom,
Yeah.
you gotta keep
you
like
want to make paste and
rotating your pans and,
They're using them to
and
launch
flipping
them in
them
the
and
woods.
moving them levels and keeping an eye on it.
I tried one shot.
Yeah.
The kids are monopolizing it, so I finally got one shot.
Trying to get around to all of
Those
them.
little kids just want to go all over.
Yeah, that would be good. That's better than the sun-dried tomato.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm biased, but you know.
Giant slingshot.
Right.
Is that a different kind he's got coming up?
Yeah.
These are all the same.
Yeah. They're different tomatoes, but same jar.
Yeah. But what would they be good is?
You can just throw it on pizza or
Yeah.
you know, I mean, whatever. And I'm like,
Put them in your smoker.
my mom probably didn't hear me, but she loves to put in her meatloaf. And so I said, as long as you keep making meatloaf, I'll keep making the smoked tomatoes for you.
Almost sweet.
Yeah, you know, because that fresh tomato flavor just gets reduced by evaporating the water content of it. So it just becomes like more unctuous and more condensed. But not like that sun-dried tomato thing. And you know, it's funny. I remember years ago that I used to, like, when I first found out about sun-dried tomatoes, probably like 30 years ago, I'm like, wow, these are amazing. And nowadays I'm like, they I don't know, they're not the same. Maybe there were higher quality tomatoes back then, because you would think that the tomato flavor would be like that, more condensed.
intense, yeah.
Right, so I don't know. We'll try some sun-dried tomatoes this year. That big smoker back there is what I was imagining using for smoking tomatoes with the amount we're coming out, but But it turns out the amount of prep work to get this thing full is like, okay, by the time I fill that up, I'm like, all right, I need a break,
So
chill
5
out.
hours in that, and then how long in the oven?
Oh, so if I'm using the oven plus this, I'm probably only going like an hour or two.
Just to smoke it?
Yeah, and I'll do, like right now it's really light smoke, but I'll do a heavier smoke on that.
And that was apple. I heard you say apple.
Yeah, that's what we're using. But I mean, if you have something, you know, or your neighbor has something that's, you know, cherry wood or
one of them's cherry.
yeah.
You said an hour or two that is all it takes to.
Well, to get the smoke flavor, if I'm using the oven to help dry them, I'll just do like an hour or two in here with a heavier smoke. Then, see, right now we're just kind of a wisp. But if I'm using the oven, it'll then an hour or two in here, and then it'll go in the oven, and it'll probably take another 5 hours in the oven at least. This definitely is a lot faster than the oven because it's not, you know, the ovens are sealed pretty tight, so that moisture stays in the oven more, especially at that low temperature. But it's easier to regulate your temperature. So if I'm like doing something that I'm right there a lot and I can check it a lot, then I'll like try and speed up the process by just using this to smoke them. But if it's something that I'm like, I want to set it for a while and not have to babysit it too much, then in the oven I only have to check it every couple hours instead
You can
of
leave it overnight.
yeah. That's what I had been doing, and you know it's kind of it's one of those things that it changes every time you make it because you're using different tomatoes. The water content's different, so you just kind of you get the feel for like these tomatoes have a ton of water content versus these ones with the ribs here, so a lot less water, so they'll smoke and dry a lot quicker.
What about the little cherry tomatoes? What are those like to smoke?
Those are great. They go fast. They go really fast. They're tasty. I personally prefer those fresh, so I don't do it a whole lot. Excuse me. But my favorite that this guy introduced me to. This is one of the seeds that you brought over, right? So these Rosa de Beneventos, and it's just kind of like the perfect size. You half it, and it's just
Stores well, and it's great.
and it's like a great like end of season. I think I've got like 120 pounds from them last year at the end of the season. In like, it was like the end of October. So it's just like and they looked about like that. So yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
You like it?
I do.
All right.